What happens when human density gets to a point where it's exponentially more people than we have in the United States? What does that look like? And it's real time. You can go look at it in Europe. The density of humanity is there, and they're doing quite well.
Welcome to the Level Design Podcast, a podcast for architects and engineers who want to thrive in this industry by creating more freedom, fulfillment, and financial security. Join us in uncovering how to restore value and honor to the unique people who choose to be designers and caretakers of our built world, and why it's essential to the future of our society, our industry, and our planet.
The trip was an invitation through American Public Works Association, and it was an invitation to get a delegation of American engineers around the wastewater world, which really focused on environment and treatment and, how do we treat our drinking water and in our environments, our environments are getting polluted. And then the other was, okay, at the same point in time, clean drinking water ends up being sewage. And what are we doing about cleaning that up with sewage treatment? So it was a delegation invitation from the German engineers and politicians to share knowledge about how we are creating safe environments for not only humanity, but every other thing on the planet in the midst of human activity, interaction. Right? Especially waste, right? So it's a knowledge sharing about all those things. And we were invited to go over there. We met as a delegation, a group of about 20 of us, pretty mixed bag of folks, engineers, designers, people in charge of EPA organizations, environmental protection. But it was a really aggressive trip. They put out a real aggressive trip. We were 12-hour days going all over Germany. So
wow,
it was pretty interesting. Multiple water treatment facilities, sewer treatment facilities, private sector, pharmaceutical companies, how they were dealing with their industrial waste. It was quite a robust tour. And then, of course,
super cool.
Yeah, it was super fun. And of course, in Germany, we saw the oldest brewery in the world. We got to tour that.
That's awesome.
It was awesome. So, yeah.
Wow. So it was, you got to nerd out a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Had you been to Germany before?
Never been to Germany before, so I was pretty stoked. About seeing that. And it's an interesting place. I mean, it's Germany and all their history, and they're very good engineers. They're very technical. They're very cutting edge in that world. But they're also up against a lot of change, just like we are
right
in the space. And for comparison, you might go, okay, well, the state of Wyoming, right, from where I'm from, is roughly the size of Germany, kind of a gross comparison.
Wow.
And the state of Wyoming has 500,000 people, right? It's roughly 400 miles by 400 miles or something like that. Germany, roughly the same size, has like 83 million people. So you go, wait a minute. And so their conversation was about the density of their population and how Europe developed with a lot more density, and they're already there. So there wasn't a lot of, I'm going to say, planning about infrastructure. These small communities over thousands of years developed prior to infrastructure thinking, prior to vehicle thinking. But these little towns are like, a mile apart, and they're dotted all over the place. And that's currently the makeup of the place.
Wow.
And it's super dense. And they had made some comments that piqued us as an American delegation. We were kind of like, what? They were like, yeah, there's no natural rivers in Germany. They were like, what? They said there's 0 natural water courses anymore.
They just don't have the space, right?
Yeah, they've all been manipulated by man. And some crazy number, like several hundred electric power plants, hydroelectric plants. What? There's like several hundred dams where they're producing electricity. I'm like, it's just crazy. So for us, we're a little bit on the population side for the United States. It was interesting. We're actually quite a bit ahead of the curve in, our environmental regulations about protecting natural water courses. We're there now. So we spend a lot of our time protecting our natural waterways and the riparian areas and our wildlife that rely on these natural systems. And we're already protecting those. And before the density of population of the United States gets to like a Germany. So in a lot of ways, we're pre-planning or already working on preservation of natural environments, where it's long past for Germany or Europe. That was decided thousands of years ago, and they're having a hard time recapturing that. They'd like to. When you talk to them, they'd like to, but it's just almost hard to reverse. But, they're working on it. So that was interesting.
Yeah, I found, so Germany, you were pretty close with the sizing and the population and stuff, which is pretty wild to think about, like how much more space geographically we have here in the US.
Yeah.
And then Germany had, in 2023, almost 7,000 operational hydropower plants, and the US had 2,081. Which I thought the US would blow that out of the water, just given size.
Just given the size, the geographic area is a lot smaller. It's like, how do you get that many dams in a little geographic area? Yeah. And it's fairly flat until you get to the south. So, interesting. And they solve problems differently. So they're up to the 70s. All their sewage was just going raw into the rivers, untreated.
Fun.
And got pretty rough, and people were getting sick. So they started working on treating sewage, but they were up against different problems than we have. Of course, the density was there, and the communities were so small, and there were so many of them. They were having you can't have every little town of 500 or 1,000 afford water treatment or sewer treatment, which is kind of what we do often, not always. But just a geographic infrastructure problem is, how do you solve that when all these communities aren't big enough to fund their own treatment facilities? How do you clean up these rivers when they can't fund it? It's a monumental problem as we listened to them. It was like, how do you do this? And they ended up where they separated clean rivers from dirty rivers, and they created these nonprofit organizations to treat systems. So the water treatment facilities are almost always nonprofit organizations, which was
fascinating.
Interesting. And they would serve 40, 50 large amounts of small communities. And they would still collect that sewage in that dirty river and treat the stormwater and the sewer at the same time, because that's the only way they could figure out how to get the conveyance with all these little towns. So, which was super interesting. And then the treatment plants were so high tech, and they were treating the sewage and the stormwater to such a level, it was drinking quality.
Wow.
It was American drinking quality. Even the pharmaceuticals that we see in our wastewater now, they were treating that successfully in many cases. Or the ones that couldn't had plans to do that, because we're getting a lot of pharmaceuticals in our rivers.
Yeah.
So that was very fascinating too, is to say part of our rivers are actually sewage conveyance, but with storm and sewage, and then when we get it, they treat it to a drinking water quality before they release it to the river again. It was super interesting. And then the other thing that was curious is, how does these nonprofit kind of pseudo government organizations, what's their utility rate? Because they're not really motivated. In the United States, we often are driven by our utilities, our profit organizations overseen by PUC or other agencies. So what's the net difference in the cost to the ratepayer in a kind of a government burden nonprofit? And it was extraordinarily more affordable. Their rates were a lot cheaper than our systems.
Yeah.
For delivering.
Different incentives.
It's interesting. You'd almost think a competitive business model like we have would actually drive that lower, but it didn't. Their utility rates seem more affordable. Maybe it's because of the number. Maybe because they have 80 million. I don't know. But
right,
that could be it too. But it was just all interesting, is what happens when human density gets to a point where it's exponentially more people than we have in the United States. What does that look like? And it's real time. You can go look at it in Europe. The density of humanity is there, and they're doing quite well.
Looking for a new opportunity? Interested in being part of an expanding network of independent engineers and architects who are thinking differently? Level Design Partners is on a mission to create prosperity for design professionals, the industry, and the world, using innovative business systems and a culture of collaboration. We believe that traditional education and firm structures want you to be a cog in their machine, depriving you of key skills needed to thrive, thus commoditizing an entire industry in the process. Gain access to skills, tools, and systems by partnering with Level Design Partners. Learn more at leveldesignpartners.com.
Yeah. So you would say, just high level, they're doing better from that standpoint than the US.
There are regulations for drinking water and wastewater treatments higher than ours.
Okay.
Their conveyance systems are extraordinarily more dangerous than ours. Everything's in a pipe pretty much and gets treated before it sees a natural environment. And so in that regard, we're a lot farther ahead.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah.
One question that's interesting is, you got invited in one way or another by basically their APWA equivalent, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Similar.
Yeah. And so do we do that in the US? Do we invite other countries to come look at what we're doing?
We do. There's a lot of networking, and it's a little sad that that's not talked about more, but there is a lot of networking going on in the world, shared knowledge and engineering and solutions. What are you doing? What are we doing? Technology is advancing so fast. So for them, they're very tech focused. So you see different solutions and more robust solutions to the same problem we have. So that knowledge sharing is going on both ways. I was actually on a plane back from Germany, and I was sitting to a fellow. He goes, "Yeah, I'm going to a conference in Fort Collins." And I go, "Well, what do you do?" He goes, "Plant science." And I'm going to Fort Collins to a conference, and we're trying to understand how in the hell plants turn to the sunlight. We still don't understand why. And if we can figure it out, we can cause all kinds of better thriving in the plant world, but we can't figure out how a plant turns to the sunlight, the actual science of it, the physics of it.
Yeah, it's not like it has a muscle and bone skeletal system that forces it over. That's true. I've never thought about that.
Yeah, or a mind. There's no brain there that says, "Hey, the sun's over here."
Yeah, that is crazy. And they move a lot. If you watch a time lapse, they're all over the place.
Yeah, and we don't know how that works.
That's wild that we don't know that.
So that's even the plant world. They're flying back and forth, and they're sharing knowledge with scientists, and we are one world, right?
Yeah, when you take the politics out of it and all the BS, the drama, there are things that tie us all together.
Yeah.
The biggest one being that, if the ship goes down, we're all gone.
Yeah, right.
So
it's happened several times in the past, right?
Exactly.
Mass extinctions. Yeah. So it was a fascinating trip. There's lots of surprises that were wow.
Tell me about the crab. Was it crabs that they use?
There was this one of the largest pharmaceutical production companies in the world, and several thousand people work there. And the wastewater, we went to tour the wastewater for this industrial. In the pharmaceutical world, a lot of things, they just don't want to release these rivers. All these pharmaceuticals are doing bad things to our biology and our plant life in the rivers. So,
right.
So the effort was, the result of this company was they had a lot of focus on this environmental protection of their wastewater before it got released back to nature or back to the river. So one of the highest tech wastewater plants in the world. It was fascinating. And the guy that was running it was kind of an interesting guy. He'd been there. It sounded like, the way he described it, it sounded like he had kind of worked his way up through the organization for 3.5 decades. And he self-taught, and he found himself leading this facility and often being the director of technology advancement, designing systems to make sure that, lots of checks and balances, make sure the systems were working. And if they didn't work, there was alarms, and there was multiple backups of checking. And he was kind of interesting guy, because he said, finally, he goes, "Still not sleeping at night. Still worried. I'm still worried. I can't sleep. Feel like a sensor could not work, and, we're doing bad things to the environment." And he was just passionate. And he goes, I was researching, there's got to be, something. And he ends up finding this potential backup system that made him comfortable as a person, which was his issue, was, the best systems in the world were not good enough for him.
Right.
He wanted something else. And he found a company that was working on exactly that, is creating final checks and balances that was not tech.
Mm-hmm.
It was actually nature. It was a nature test.
Wasn't reliant on power, electricity,
Well, no, it was still relying on that, but it wasn't a sensor. Something's trying to detect a chemical in the water. But yeah, him and this company did it sounded like the first prototype installed a couple years ago, working well. But it's this Dungeness crab, it sounded like. I hope I got that word right. But it's a really, really small crab. It's like super small. And this particular crab's super sensitive to what it consumes. And it's put in the waste stream. And this company created a monitoring system that watches the activity of the crabs. And if there's an anomaly, like they start swimming funny or they start getting slow or they start acting drunk, alarms go off.
This just sounds made up.
I know. We were starting watching it on the screen. You could watch the crabs all moving around in the waste stream. You could watch them. They're all like swimming around. And this machine senses whether they're starting to consume something that's not good for them. And then he said it makes me sleep at night because
that's unreal.
Because nature's telling me something is bad in our waste effluent.
Yeah, pattern interrupt.
So
that's so cool. And also the fact that he couldn't sleep even after all that, it makes me think that would be a great just test for design quality is, can the engineer sleep at night peacefully?
Yeah, right.
But this guy sounds like he had an extra layer of, he wanted backups to the backups to the backups.
He did. He was very worried, concerned about his world and his environment. And he knew that the pharmaceutical company was, if potentially harmful if it would get into nature, and it didn't end up where it was intended to end up. And so he was a very caring person. Yeah. Driving it. And that's a good message, to our listeners, is there's a lot of people that care that are in these fields and they're working hard. You hear about the failures, or you see things that, don't look like they're being done well. And the truth is a lot of things are being done well. And there's a lot of care out there. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot that goes on behind the scenes that you don't hear about, and of course you only hear about it when things go wrong. So it can be a hard profession. It's hard to work on these challenges because you're not really rewarded socially as much, but it's the most important. It's arguably some of the most important work to be done.
Yeah. Keeps us all safe, right? Yeah. We're not social media influencers at all, are we?
No.
But
we're working on it though.
Yeah, we're trying to do it.
Maybe eventually.
Yeah. Yeah, it was a fun trip. And wow, humans can be fairly dense and still have a clean environment. That was interesting.
Yeah, it sounds like we can learn a lot from the way they run things, and they can learn from us too. And we should have more of that. It sounds like it's happening, but the more we learn from each other, it's all figure outable. We just have to put our minds together and see what works.
Yeah, we visited a pump factory, and they make pumps, and they were really, really high tech, and they were doing, it sounded like one of the first prototypes of photovoltaic on the roofs. They were storing the energy through a hydrogen splitter, which sounded like it was the first time. And we were watching it work. They were literally using the energy from the sun, splitting the hydrogen, then using that to run generators when the sun was gone. So, yeah, so they're pushing the green. Germany is pushing the green big time. Their sewer treatment plants, for instance, a lot of them were almost net zero.
Wow.
Which is unheard of. So they were producing as much energy as they were consuming to treat the sewage.
Unbelievable.
It was super cool to watch that kind of process have a net zero effect. Yeah. So, all of these things that we talk about are not attainable. Well, guess what? They're attainable.
Yeah.
If you can have a whole industrial process actually be net zero energy wise, wow, it's happening. So,
well, thanks for sharing.
Yeah, fun trip.
So it sounds promising and it's all positive. So
yeah.
Is it something that you'll do again, or is it kind of a one-time thing, you think?
Those kind of trips I think are always valuable, especially if we're sharing the exciting things about engineering and architecture and design and the exciting things that's not being talked about enough. And I need to continue to educate myself, see what's out there. So I don't think, if we're going to share everything going on in the world and the wonderful things that are going on for the future of humanity and the planet and technology and solutions, I think if we're going to do this, I think I need to be continuing to learn myself, right, and talk about it. Yeah. Whatever perspective we're bringing on this podcast, I hope we get better at it. I hope we grow, and I hope it becomes more interesting. We have more interesting guests, and it's just very educational. So I'm striving, Miles, to continue those kind of efforts for sure.
I love it. Let's do it. Well, thanks, Scott. Thanks for sharing, and we'll talk soon. See you on the next one.
Thank you.
Thanks for listening. If you found value in this episode, support us by sharing it with someone or leaving a review. In upcoming episodes, we'll discuss the realities of the industry today and what the future may look like. It's our belief that positive changes for architects and engineers is not the obligation of the industry, but rather a choice you make to reimagine how we work together. We invite you to join us in creating a world in which design professionals thrive. Learn about our mission and get involved by following us wherever you listen to podcasts and subscribing to our newsletter at leveldesignpartners.com.